Hey guys. So I'm going to be talking about porting my first ever Android app to Flutter. Rocklogger is an app that I made about 8 years ago at the suggestion of my dad, who's a geologist. So it's for geologists to measure the angle and orientation and position of rocks that stick out of the ground. You put the phone on a rock and it will measure like the plane, the slope, the position, the angle, and the compass and the GPS position of the rocks. So the first screen is that's the logging screen. It's on there when you measure the rocks. This is a list of all the rocks that you've measured. Then you can plot them on a Google map or on a plot called a stereo-net plot. So that's that. My aim was primarily to learn Flutter and to put it on the App Store, because I've had numerous geologists over the past 8 years wanting an Apple version, and I couldn't provide them with one. I basically wanted a one-to-one copy of the existing app with basically exactly the same UI, same code base, core business logic, all exactly the same, so I don't need to maintain. So it's easy to maintain both code bases. So that was the aim. How did I do it? So first started off by copying all the assets, icons, strings into the new Flutter project. And then next step, translate data classes and business logic from Java into Dart. Conveniently, Java and Dart are actually really quite similar in terms of syntax and structure. Dart is very similar to Java, just with a few different features and a few less features, depending on where you're looking. Then re-implement the UI using Flutter's declarative UI and directive state management, and then put them side by side. I couldn't really use automated testing for a lot of this app because automated test suites and like cloud testing functions, you can't actually move the device because they're in a rack of 100 devices, and the actual position of the device is fairly important in what I'm doing. So have them on two phones side by side and see that they are showing the same angle and compass and position. Then publish the store. So start with R.string. So you know your normal Android XML strings file with a little bit of regular expression magic. Put that into a class in Dart. And you can also create an R class in Dart, which looks very similar to R.string, R.array, color. If you actually, so Flutter doesn't have as much as extensive localization and resource functionality that Android has. Android is a lot more powerful. And if you do want to provide different language support, you have to provide your own implementation of a localization delegate. So if you do have other languages, you would use that. Same for color, regular expression magic, colors class. Once you do that, Flutter and Dart doesn't have a string format function for your %f, %d strings that Android uses, but there's a package for that called sprintf. So I made a simple wrapper function, getString, which looks exactly the same as Android getString. And then if you put that outside of a class body, you can call it from anywhere. So now, first bit of code side by side. One of these is Java, one of these is Dart, and there's only very, very minor differences. Dart, you can throw any object. It doesn't need to be an exception, so you can throw a string. And in Java, we've got the context for context getString, which we're not using. Translating the rest of the business logic into Dart. Key differences in the primitives, so your Java int float primitives. Dart doesn't have a concept of primitives. Every object can be null until it's initialized, and you only have ints, doubles, and bools in terms of numbers. Java has arrays, and you have primitive arrays that by default are filled with zeros, whereas Dart, you have to use a special list constructor, which will give you a fixed size list. 2 being the size, and 0 being it's filled with zeros. So a little bit of a difference. And then access modifiers in Dart you only get 2, By default it's public, and if it's private you have to put in an underscore in the prefix. So convert all your floats to doubles in a regular expression, booleans to bools, change your arrays, remove access modifiers. Then once you've got it in Dart, you can use through factoring to put in an underscore for private functions. And you'd probably remove getters and setters to be more idiomatic Dart. Reimplement UI. So all of your activities and fragments are now widgets. Reusable parts of those are also widgets. Everything is a widget. You have to adjust your thinking from a UI that's created once from XML and then updated as things change to a UI that's returned as a function as part of the build method. That's called when any of its state changes. And that makes things a lot easier to reason about because instead of having to update different parts of the UI at different times to be more efficient, you just declare what your UI is as a function of the widget and a function of its state. So that turns out to be quite a lot easier. It made the main logging screen code like 2.5 times smaller without even counting the Android layout XML files. Other screens are up to 4 times smaller. The hot reload is as awesome as it sounds. So it does only take like a second or so to reload on screen, which is awesome because it's now kind of a drag going back to normal Android development. My day job is WebJet Android, and so WebJet will take about a minute to build, deploy, install, and then if I want to change something in like WebJet flight results, just a flight search can take 30 seconds to a minute to return. So it can be up to 1 or 2 minutes before I'm getting to the thing where I made the change and I forgot what I was doing. Whereas hot reload, it's instantaneous. It's faster than the XML preview in Android. I only had to write one Swift class, which was for reading the accelerometer sensor data and putting that into Flutter. There's another logging mode in my app for taking photos and calling out to the platform, starting the camera, getting the photo as a file back from the camera and putting the file into my app's local storage is one line of code. So this will call out to the native platform, Android or iOS, and will start the camera. In Android it would call start activity for result, get the result in on activity result, save the file for local storage, and then pass that back into your app. It also had to expose, and it does something similar on iOS, start the camera, get the file result. But yeah, just one line of code and it will do it for both platforms. The way it's also really great for anywhere you'd use start activity for result, or for example, determining which button you clicked in a dialog, because then you can make very sequential code. I'll just say, await show dialog, and then that will return the button that was clicked in the dialog, and you can say, if they clicked save, then do this, which makes things much easier with await. Next step, side by side. So here's the original Android app, as we saw, and here's the Flutter app. I've changed the UI slightly and put in a bottom tab navigation bar, but there's the same data. So all of these data records, all these lines are all in the same place, from the original Android to it running on iPhone. Last step, publish the store. So I needed a new icon because I couldn't use that one because Apple has a review. Developer program, sole trader, ABN, GST, upload tax forms, test flight, review, apps, in-app processing, review, ready, screenshots, all of this stuff, which none of it you have to do on the Play Store. But that's it. It's now in the store as of a week or so ago. Yeah. Questions?